What happens when a chosen one is deprived of one of the most primal forces of human nature? Imagine carrying an extraordinary purpose, a deeper vision of life, a calling that sets you apart from the rest, yet being denied the very energy that fuels desire, intimacy, and creativity. Carl Jung believed sexuality was more than pleasure, it was raw life force, a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious, between shadow and light. Now imagine that bridge collapsing. No release, no intimacy, no exchange. The chosen one walks through life with a burning fire trapped inside, unable to breathe. What does that do to the psyche? What monsters awaken in the silence? And more importantly, what secret transformation is forged in this deprivation? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover is not comfortable. But it may uncover truths you've always felt, yet never dared to put into words. 1. The dark cost of being different. There's a weight that comes with being marked as different, and it's not the kind of weight people talk about in self-help books or spiritual circles. It's the crushing realization that while you can see deeper, feel more, and understand things others miss, you're somehow cut off from the most basic human experience, the warm touch of another person who truly wants you. You wake up every morning carrying this invisible burden. Everyone around you seems to move through life with an ease you've never known. They meet people, they connect, they fall into bed together like it's the most natural thing in the world. But for you, that simple sequence feels like watching a movie through thick glass. You can see it happening, you understand what it looks like, but you can't quite reach it yourself. The cost starts small, like a tiny crack in a window that grows bigger over time. Maybe you notice that conversations that excite you seem to overwhelm others. You talk about dreams, purpose, the deeper meaning of things, and you watch their eyes glaze over or their body language shift away from you. They came looking for light conversation, and you're offering them fire. They wanted to wade in shallow water, and you're pulling them toward the deep end, so you learn to hold back. You practice being normal, being safe, being the kind of person who doesn't ask too many questions or feel too deeply about everything. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny to you. You talk about weather and sports and safe topics that don't reveal how different your inner world really is. But this creates its own kind of suffering, because you're basically strangling the very thing that makes you who you are. The energy that wants to flow outward through authentic connection gets trapped inside you. It's like having a fire in your chest that can never quite breathe freely. You feel restless all the time, like something important is trying to happen but keeps getting blocked. Your body knows what it needs: real intimacy, genuine connection, the kind of touch that comes from being truly seen and wanted. But that need goes unmet, day after day, year after year. This isn't just about missing out on physical pleasure. That would be hard enough, but this goes deeper. When you can't share your true self with another person in the most intimate way possible, you start to question whether your true self is even acceptable. Maybe you're too much. Maybe you're too intense. Maybe the things that feel most important to you are actually burdens that push people away. You watch other people pair off and build lives together, and you feel like you're watching from behind a wall you can't see but can definitely feel. They make it look so easy. Meeting someone, falling in love, moving in together, sharing their bodies and their dreams, like it's the most natural progression in the world. But when you try to follow that same path, something always goes wrong. The loneliness becomes a constant companion, but it's not ordinary loneliness. It's the specific ache of carrying gifts that nobody seems to want, of having love to give that nobody seems able to receive. You develop a relationship with solitude that's both your refuge and your prison. You learn to find meaning alone, but you also learn to live with a hunger that never gets fed. What makes this even harder is that people are often drawn to you initially. They sense something different, something deeper, something that promises experiences they can't get elsewhere. They're attracted to your intensity, your vision, your way of seeing the world. But when it comes time for real intimacy, when the possibility of physical connection becomes real, something shifts. They pull back, they find reasons why it can't work, they choose someone safer. This creates a cruel cycle. You give people access to your mind and heart, you share your deepest thoughts and dreams, you create emotional intimacy that feels profound and real. But just when that connection could become physical, could become the full expression of human bonding, the door slams shut. You're left holding all this emotional and spiritual connection with nowhere for it to go. The cost builds up inside you like pressure in a sealed container. All that unexpressed life force, all that creative and sexual energy that has nowhere to flow, starts to change you from the inside. Sometimes it feels like you might explode from the intensity of it. Other times, it feels like you're slowly dying from the lack of real contact with another human being. You try different strategies to cope. Maybe you throw yourself into your work, your art, your spiritual practice. Maybe you convince yourself that you're above ordinary human needs, that your purpose is too important to be distracted by physical desires. Maybe you wait for the perfect person who will understand and accept all of you without requiring you to dim your light. But none of these strategies really solve the fundamental problem. You're a human being with human needs, but you're living in a way that cuts you off from one of the most essential human experiences. The cost of this deprivation goes far beyond frustration or loneliness. It changes how you see yourself, how you understand your place in the world, how you relate to your own body and desires. The darkest part is that you start to wonder if this is just how life is supposed to be for people like you. Maybe extraordinary purpose comes with extraordinary sacrifice. Maybe being chosen means being separated from ordinary joys. Maybe the price of seeing clearly is being unable to touch warmly. 2. Why chosen ones are rejected sexually. The rejection happens so consistently that you start to think there must be something fundamentally wrong with you. But the truth is both simpler and more complex than personal failure. There's an invisible force at work that most people don't understand, including the people doing the rejecting. You meet someone and feel that spark of recognition. They seem different too, deeper than most, someone who might actually understand you. The conversation flows like water, touching on subjects that matter, revealing thoughts and dreams that you rarely get to share. You feel seen, heard, appreciated for who you really are. Everything seems to be moving toward natural intimacy. Then something shifts. Maybe it's subtle at first. They take longer to respond to messages. They seem distracted when you're together. They start mentioning other people more often. Or maybe it's sudden. One day they're fully present and engaged. The next day they're distant and unavailable. They might say things like, "You're amazing, but..." Or "You deserve someone better than me," or "I'm just not ready for something this intense." This pattern repeats so often that you begin to expect it. You learn to guard your heart, even in moments of deep connection, because you know that the deeper the connection becomes, the more likely it is that they'll find a reason to run. You start to feel like you're carrying some kind of curse that makes you attractive from a distance, but impossible to actually be with. The reason this happens isn't personal, even though it feels incredibly personal. Most people live in a kind of comfortable unconsciousness. They go through their days following familiar patterns, thinking familiar thoughts, feeling emotions that stay within a manageable range. Their relationships, including their sexual relationships, help maintain this comfort zone. Intimacy with them feels good, but doesn't challenge their basic way of being in the world. But you carry something different. Your consciousness operates at a higher intensity. You see connections others miss, feel things more deeply, ask questions that cut through surface appearances to touch something real and sometimes uncomfortable. When people spend time with you, they get a taste of what it's like to be more awake, more alive, more aware than they're used to being. This is simultaneously attractive and terrifying. Part of them wants what you have, the depth, the insight, the ability to find meaning in places they've never looked. But another part of them knows instinctively that getting too close to you would require changes they're not ready to make. Being sexually intimate with you wouldn't just be physical pleasure. It would be a form of initiation into a different way of being alive. Sexual intimacy is one of the most powerful ways human beings share energy and consciousness. When two people come together physically, they're not just joining bodies, they're creating a temporary merger of their entire being. For most people, this merger happens at the level of consciousness they're already comfortable with. It feels good, it creates bonding, but it doesn't fundamentally challenge who they are. Intimacy with you would be different. The intensity of your consciousness would flow into them during the most vulnerable and open moments. They would experience life through your level of awareness, even if only temporarily. This could be incredibly beautiful and transformative, but it could also be overwhelming for someone who isn't prepared for that level of intensity. People sense this even when they can't put it into words. They feel drawn to you because you offer experiences they can't get elsewhere, but they also feel afraid because those experiences would require them to grow in ways that feel dangerous to their sense of safety and control. Their unconscious mind starts sending warning signals. This person is too much, too intense, too real. The rejection often comes from people who care about you deeply. They might genuinely love your mind, your heart, your vision of the world. But they also recognize at some level that being your intimate partner would demand a level of authenticity and presence they're not sure they can maintain. It's easier to love you from a safe distance than to risk being transformed by real closeness. This creates a painful irony. The very qualities that make you special, your depth, your consciousness, your ability to see and feel beyond ordinary limits, are also the qualities that make intimate relationship difficult. People want to experience what you have, but they don't want to become what they would need to become to be truly intimate with you. You might try to make yourself more acceptable by hiding your intensity, but this usually makes things worse. When you're not being authentic, you seem conflicted and unclear, which is confusing to potential partners. They sense that there's more to you than you're showing, but they can't figure out what it is or why you're holding back. The rejection also serves a function in your own development, even though it feels like pure punishment. Each time someone pulls away just when intimacy becomes possible, you're forced to find other ways to express your life force. You can't discharge your creative and sexual energy through casual connection, so it builds up inside you and transforms into something else. Vision, creativity, spiritual power. Most people have easy ways to release their tension and find pleasure, so they never develop the kind of internal pressure that creates extraordinary abilities. But when you're cut off from ordinary release, extraordinary possibilities begin to emerge. The very thing that causes you suffering also pushes you toward capacities that most humans never develop. Understanding this doesn't make the rejection hurt less, but it does help you stop taking it personally. The people who can't handle intimacy with you aren't rejecting you as an individual. They're responding to energies and possibilities that their psyche isn't ready to integrate. Trying to convince them or change their minds usually just confirms their feeling that you're too intense for them to handle. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the S.I.M Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. 3. The sexual energy stolen from the awakened. Something happens to your sexual energy when you're marked as different, and it's not what most people think. It doesn't disappear or die. It gets redirected into channels you never chose, feeding purposes you never agreed to serve. It's like having your life force hijacked by forces beyond your control, leaving you feeling drained in ways that go far deeper than ordinary tiredness. You feel it most acutely in those moments when sexual desire rises naturally in your body, demanding expression and release. Your system activates just like everyone else's, the warmth, the hunger, the electric need for touch and connection. But instead of finding its way into intimate human contact, that energy seems to get pulled away from you, as if some invisible hand is siphoning it off for other uses. This isn't the same as sublimation, where you consciously choose to redirect sexual energy into creative or spiritual pursuits. This feels more like theft. You want to express yourself sexually, you're ready and willing, but somehow the energy gets diverted before you can use it the way your body intended. You're left feeling like something essential has been taken from you without your permission. The theft happens in layers. First, there's the obvious level. You can't find partners who are truly available for the kind of intimacy your consciousness demands. But even when you do find someone who seems compatible, even when the possibility of sexual connection appears real, something interferes. Maybe you suddenly feel inexplicably tired when physical intimacy becomes possible. Maybe your normally strong desire simply vanishes at crucial moments. Maybe external circumstances conspire to prevent connection just when it seems most likely. You start to notice that your sexual energy seems to peak when you're alone, when there's no possibility of sharing it with another person. It's as if your life force only feels safe to emerge when there's no risk of it flowing into human connection. This creates a strange relationship with your own sexuality. You experience desire intensely, but always in isolation, always without the possibility of mutual expression. The energy that would normally flow outward through sexual connection turns inward and begins to feed other processes. You might find yourself having incredibly vivid dreams, sudden bursts of creative inspiration, or moments of spiritual insight that feel like they're coming from somewhere beyond your ordinary mind. These experiences are beautiful and meaningful, but they also feel like consolation prizes for something more fundamental that you're being denied. What makes this particularly difficult is that you can sense where your energy is going, even if you can't control it. You feel it being pulled upward through your system, feeding your consciousness, expanding your awareness, fueling your ability to see and understand things that others miss. You're being turned into a kind of antenna for higher frequencies, but the cost is your ability to ground that energy in physical intimacy with another human being. This creates a feedback loop that gets stronger over time. The more your sexual energy gets redirected into consciousness expansion, the more intense and unusual your awareness becomes. But the more intense your consciousness becomes, the harder it is to find people who can match that intensity in intimate connection. You're being systematically separated from ordinary human bonding and turned into something that operates on a different frequency entirely. You might try to resist this process, to insist on using your sexual energy the way it was apparently meant to be used. But you discover that fighting it often makes things worse. When you try to force sexual connection, you feel like you're working against some fundamental current in your life. Partners sense this conflict and become even more hesitant to engage with you intimately. The most painful part is recognizing that this isn't happening randomly. There's intelligence behind it, a purpose that you can sometimes glimpse but never fully understand. Your sexual energy is being harvested to fuel something larger than your individual happiness. You're being used as a kind of transformer, converting raw life force into consciousness that serves purposes beyond your personal desires. You feel this most acutely during times when your body is most alive and ready for connection. Instead of that aliveness flowing into another person and creating the mutual pleasure that seems so natural for others, it gets pulled away from you and channeled into expanded awareness that often feels more like a burden than a gift. You gain insight and understanding, but you lose the simple human joy of sharing your body with someone who wants to receive what you have to offer. The theft becomes more sophisticated as you become more aware of it. Instead of crude blocking of sexual opportunities, you might find that potential partners are subtly guided away from you by circumstances that seem entirely natural. Someone perfect for you moves away just as things are getting interesting. Someone you connect with deeply suddenly becomes involved with someone else. Someone who seems ready for intimacy with you develops unexpected complications that make relationship impossible. You start to feel like you're living in a reality where sexual fulfillment is always just out of reach, not because you're inadequate or undesirable, but because some force is actively working to keep that particular door closed. Your energy is needed elsewhere, for purposes that don't include personal happiness or physical satisfaction. This creates a complex relationship with your own sexuality. You learn to expect disappointment, to guard against hope, to find meaning in the very frustration that defines your experience. You develop a kind of spiritual relationship with sexual denial, finding ways to transform the ache of unfulfilled desire into fuel for creative and spiritual work. But underneath all the spiritual bypassing and creative compensation, there's still a human being who wants to be touched, held, and desired in the most basic way possible. The fact that your energy is serving larger purposes doesn't eliminate your personal needs. It just makes meeting those needs virtually impossible. You begin to understand that your sexuality isn't really yours anymore. It belongs to whatever force is using you for its own purposes. You're allowed to feel desire, to experience the full intensity of sexual longing, but you're not allowed to discharge that energy in ways that would bring you personal satisfaction and connection. 4. The intimate emptiness. Nobody understands. There's a hollowness that lives inside people like you, and it's not the kind of emptiness that meditation teaches you to embrace or that philosophy helps you understand. It's the specific ache of having deep love to give, but no one capable of receiving it, of carrying intimate treasures that remain forever unshared because no one can handle the intensity of what you offer. You wake up every morning with this invisible wound in your chest. It's not exactly loneliness because you've learned to be comfortable alone. It's not depression because you can still find joy and meaning in life. It's something more specific and more cruel, the knowledge that you have gifts of intimacy that the world seems designed to reject. The emptiness has weight to it, like carrying a hollow space that somehow feels heavy. You go through your days interacting with people, having conversations, building friendships, even experiencing moments of deep connection. But underneath all of that social engagement, there's this persistent sense that something essential is missing, something that makes all other connections feel incomplete. You've tried to fill this emptiness in different ways. Maybe you threw yourself into work or creative projects, believing that achievement might satisfy the hunger for connection. Maybe you developed intense friendships, hoping that emotional intimacy could substitute for physical closeness. Maybe you turned to spiritual practices, trying to find in transcendence what you couldn't find in human touch. But none of these substitutes quite work. They're meaningful and valuable in their own right, but they don't touch the specific emptiness that lives in the place where intimate partnership should be. You can have a rich, full life in many ways, but there remains this persistent sense of incompleteness, like a puzzle with one crucial piece forever missing. The cruelest part is that most people can't understand what you're experiencing. They see you as strong, independent, someone who has figured out how to live meaningfully without needing another person. They might even admire what they perceive as your self-sufficiency. But they don't see the private moments when the emptiness becomes so acute that you feel like you might disappear into it. This isn't the emptiness of someone who has never experienced love or connection. You know what intimacy feels like. You understand the beauty of sharing yourself deeply with another person. The emptiness comes from knowing what's possible, but being somehow prevented from accessing it. It's the ache of a capacity that remains unused, a gift that finds no recipient. You feel it most sharply in the quiet moments, late at night, when the world settles into silence, during long walks when your mind has space to wander, in those transitions between sleep and waking when defenses are down. The emptiness rises up like a tide, reminding you of what's missing, what you're carrying alone that was meant to be shared. Sometimes you catch glimpses of couples moving through the world together, sharing their inner lives in ways that seem so natural and easy. You watch them touch casually, communicate with glances, navigate life as a team rather than as separate individuals. You feel happy for them, but you also feel the contrast with your own experience like a physical pain. The emptiness teaches you things about yourself that you might never have learned otherwise. You discover depths of self-reliance that surprise you. You learn to find wholeness within yourself rather than seeking completion through another person. You develop a relationship with solitude that becomes both sanctuary and teacher. But these lessons come at a cost. The very strength you develop through managing the emptiness also makes you less accessible to potential partners. You learn to be so complete within yourself that others sometimes feel unnecessary to your happiness. This creates another layer of separation, making the very independence you've cultivated a barrier to the connection you still crave. The emptiness also distorts your perception of what intimate relationship should be. Because you've been denied ordinary partnership for so long, you might develop unrealistic expectations about what connection with another person could provide. You imagine that the right relationship would fill the emptiness completely, heal all wounds, make up for years of solitude in one perfect union. This idealization makes actual relationship even more difficult. No real human being can live up to the fantasy of perfect completion that the emptiness has created in your mind. Real people are flawed, limited, sometimes unavailable in ways that disappoint. When you've been carrying emptiness for years, the reality of imperfect human connection can feel like another kind of rejection. You learn to carry the emptiness like a secret companion. In public, you appear complete, self-sufficient, someone who has transcended ordinary needs for partnership. But privately, you tend to this hollow space like a wound that never quite heals. You feed it with art, music, books, spiritual practices, anything that temporarily fills the space with beauty or meaning. The emptiness becomes part of your identity in ways that both serve and limit you. It drives you toward deeper self-understanding, pushes you to find meaning beyond ordinary happiness, forces you to develop capacities that partnered people often don't need to cultivate. But it also keeps you separate, always slightly removed from the easy social bonds that others take for granted. What makes this particularly difficult is that the emptiness isn't just personal, it carries archetypal weight. You're not just missing an individual relationship, you're cut off from one of the fundamental human experiences that gives life meaning and connection. This isn't just your personal wound, it's a separation from something essential to human nature itself. The emptiness whispers questions that have no easy answers. Why are you denied something so basic? What purpose does this separation serve? Is the longing itself meant to teach you something, or are you simply paying a price for being different that others never have to pay? These questions circle through your mind during the quiet moments when the emptiness feels most present. 5. When sexual loneliness becomes destiny. There comes a moment when you stop believing that things will change, when the pattern of sexual rejection and emotional isolation becomes so consistent that you accept it as a permanent feature of your life rather than a temporary difficulty. This isn't giving up hope. It's something deeper and more complex. It's recognizing that your path apparently doesn't include the kind of intimate partnership that others experience as natural and expected. The shift happens gradually, then all at once. You spend years trying different approaches, working on yourself, believing that if you just become more attractive, more available, more normal, someone will finally be able to receive what you have to offer. You modify your behavior, soften your intensity, practice being the kind of person who seems easier to love. But the core pattern remains unchanged. Deep connection followed by inevitable withdrawal when real intimacy becomes possible. Eventually, you stop fighting against the current of your life and begin to flow with it instead. This feels like a kind of death at first. The death of the dream that you'll find someone who can meet you fully, who can handle your intensity and match your depth. But it's also the beginning of a different kind of life, one organized around different principles and different sources of meaning. The loneliness transforms from an acute pain into a familiar companion. You learn its rhythms, its seasons, its particular ways of expressing itself in your body and mind. Instead of trying to escape it or cure it, you begin to work with it as a creative force, a teacher, a guide into territories of experience that partnered people rarely explore. This doesn't mean you become bitter or closed-hearted. In fact, the opposite often happens. When you stop desperately seeking someone to complete you, you become more genuinely available to the connections that are actually possible. Friendships deepen because you're not constantly evaluating people as potential partners. Creative work flourishes because you're not distracted by the hope and disappointment of romantic pursuit. The sexual energy that has nowhere to go in ordinary partnership begins to find other outlets. You might discover artistic abilities you never knew you had, spiritual insights that surprise you with their clarity, or intellectual capacities that expand beyond what you thought possible. The life force that would normally flow into intimate relationship gets redirected into forms of expression that serve larger purposes. But this transformation isn't without its shadows. There's a grief that lives alongside the acceptance, a mourning for experiences you'll apparently never have. You feel this most acutely when you encounter couples who seem genuinely happy together, who have found in each other the kind of completion and companionship that remains forever out of your reach. The loneliness becomes woven into your sense of identity in ways that both strengthen and isolate you. You become someone who knows how to be alone without being lonely, who has learned to find wholeness within yourself rather than seeking it through another person. This is a genuine achievement, but it also sets you apart from people who have never had to develop such radical self-sufficiency. You start to see your sexual loneliness as serving some larger purpose that you can't fully understand. Maybe you're being prepared for work that requires complete availability that couldn't be accomplished if you were anchored in ordinary partnership. Maybe your consciousness is being refined through solitude in ways that wouldn't be possible if you had the comfort and distraction of intimate relationship. This sense of larger purpose helps give meaning to what otherwise feels like senseless suffering. You begin to frame your experience not as personal failure or cosmic cruelty, but as a specific kind of spiritual path. The path of the one who serves through solitude, who contributes to human evolution through what they're able to accomplish alone. But even when you find meaning in your loneliness, even when you accept it as destiny rather than misfortune, there are still moments when the human cost feels almost unbearable. Late at night, when your body aches for touch that never comes. During times of celebration, when you have no one to share your joy, in moments of difficulty, when you must face every challenge as a party of one. The acceptance of sexual loneliness as destiny changes how you move through the world. You stop looking at every interesting person as a potential partner and start seeing them simply as fellow human beings with their own paths and purposes. This creates a different kind of freedom, but also a different kind of isolation. You develop a relationship with your own sexuality that's unlike what most people experience. Instead of sexuality being about connection with another person, it becomes a private conversation with life force itself. You learn to honor your desires without expecting them to be fulfilled in conventional ways. You find ways to express your erotic nature through creativity, through connection with beauty, through appreciation of life's sensual pleasures, even when experienced alone. The loneliness teaches you about love in ways that partnership might not. When you can't discharge your loving energy through intimate relationship, you learn to love in more universal ways. Loving life itself, loving beauty wherever you find it, loving the people in your world without needing them to complete you or fulfill your personal desires. This evolution of your capacity to love becomes one of the gifts that emerges from sexual loneliness. You develop a kind of loving that's less possessive, less needy, more able to appreciate others for who they are rather than for what they might provide. This is beautiful and meaningful, but it's also another form of separation from ordinary human experience. The destiny of sexual loneliness ultimately becomes a path of service, though not one you would have chosen voluntarily. Your life force, denied the usual outlets of intimate partnership, finds ways to serve human evolution, consciousness expansion, creative expression that benefits others, even if it doesn't bring you personal satisfaction. You become living proof that human beings can survive and even thrive without one of the experiences that most people consider essential to a meaningful life. This is both an achievement and a sacrifice, both a form of mastery and a kind of ongoing loss that never completely heals. 6. The hidden curse of higher consciousness. The moment you begin to see more clearly than others, you sign an invisible contract that nobody warns you about. Higher consciousness doesn't come free. It demands payment in the form of separation from ordinary human pleasures, especially the simple joy of being sexually desired by someone who can actually handle who you are. You probably didn't choose this expanded awareness. It chose you, often through difficult experiences that cracked open your normal way of seeing the world. Maybe it was trauma that forced you to develop unusual psychological strength. Maybe it was spiritual experiences that showed you realities beyond ordinary perception. Maybe it was simply the natural evolution of a mind that couldn't stop asking questions others were comfortable leaving unanswered. But whatever opened your consciousness also marked you as different in ways that affect every area of your life, especially your ability to form intimate relationships. The same clarity that allows you to see through social pretenses, understand deeper patterns, and perceive truths that others miss, also makes you incredibly difficult to be close to. Most people live in a kind of comfortable fog that protects them from seeing too much, feeling too deeply, or understanding things that might disturb their peace of mind. This fog isn't stupidity. It's a natural protective mechanism that allows them to function without being overwhelmed by the complexity and intensity of existence. Your higher consciousness has burned away this protective fog. You see things as they really are, not as people pretend them to be. You feel the undercurrents of emotion and meaning that flow beneath surface conversations. You understand motivations and patterns that others either can't see or don't want to acknowledge. This clarity is a gift in many ways, but it's also a curse when it comes to intimate relationships. When someone with ordinary consciousness tries to get close to you, they're exposed to levels of awareness that feel overwhelming. You don't even have to try to overwhelm them. Your natural way of being in the world includes perceptions and insights that penetrate their comfortable illusions. They sense that being truly intimate with you would require them to see things they're not ready to see, feel things they're not prepared to feel. This creates an invisible barrier around you that operates automatically. People are drawn to your depth and intensity, but they're also instinctively repelled by the demands that intimacy with you would place on their own consciousness. They would have to wake up to be with you, and most people aren't ready for that level of awakening. The curse operates on multiple levels. Physically, your expanded awareness often makes you more sensitive to energy, emotion, and environmental factors that others don't even notice. This can make sexual intimacy challenging because you're processing so much more information than your partner. What feels like simple physical pleasure to them might feel like an overwhelming symphony of sensation, emotion, and energetic exchange to you. Emotionally, your higher consciousness makes you aware of subtleties and complexities in relationship that others experience as simple and straightforward. You pick up on unconscious patterns, hidden fears, and unspoken needs that your partner might not even know they have. This depth of perception can feel intrusive to people who prefer to keep things light and easy. Spiritually, your consciousness operates at frequencies that most people find disorienting. Being intimate with you isn't just about sharing bodies, it's about merging with awareness that includes dimensions of reality they've never explored. This can trigger fear, resistance, or simply the sense that they're in over their head. The curse becomes stronger as your consciousness expands further. The more clearly you see, the more isolated you become from people operating at ordinary levels of awareness. You start to feel like you're living in a different world, even when you're physically in the same space as others. This isn't arrogance or superiority. It's the natural consequence of perceiving realities that others can't access. You might try to hide your expanded awareness to pretend you're more ordinary than you actually are, but this creates its own problems. When you're not being authentic about your level of consciousness, you seem conflicted and unclear, which is even more confusing to potential partners. They sense there's more to you than you're showing, but they can't figure out what you're hiding or why. The curse also affects how you experience your own sexuality. When your consciousness is operating at higher frequencies, ordinary sexual experiences can feel limiting or even disappointing. You need intimacy that engages all levels of your being, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. But most people are only equipped for connection at one or two of these levels. This means that even when you do find sexual connection, it often feels incomplete or unsatisfying. Your expanded consciousness is hungry for forms of intimacy that transcend ordinary physical pleasure. You want union that includes sharing of awareness, merging of consciousness, exploration of realities that most people don't even know exist. But partners who can offer this level of intimacy are incredibly rare. The curse creates a feedback loop that strengthens over time. The more isolated you become due to your expanded consciousness, the more that consciousness expands to fill the space left by missing human connection. You develop capacities for solitary insight and spiritual connection that further separate you from ordinary human experience. You begin to understand that higher consciousness isn't just a gift or achievement. It's a form of exile from normal human life. You can see more, understand more, and experience more than most people, but you pay for these abilities with separation from the simple pleasures that make life sweet for others. The curse isn't malicious. It's more like a natural law. Just as you can't unsee something once you've truly seen it, you can't return to ordinary consciousness once you've awakened to higher possibilities. The awareness that gives you so much also costs you the ability to find satisfaction in relationships that can't match your depth. Understanding this as a curse rather than personal failure helps you stop fighting against it or trying to fix it. You begin to accept that higher consciousness comes with specific costs, including the cost of sexual and romantic isolation. This acceptance doesn't eliminate the loneliness, but it does help you stop taking it personally. 7. The brutal price of spiritual evolution. There's something nobody tells you about spiritual growth. The more you evolve, the more you're separated from everything that makes human life comfortable and familiar. Evolution isn't a gentle process of becoming more enlightened while keeping all your ordinary pleasures intact. It's a brutal transformation that demands sacrifices you never agreed to make. You probably started your spiritual journey believing that growth would make life better, that expanding your consciousness would bring more love, more joy, more of everything beautiful. But the reality of spiritual evolution is much harsher than anyone admits. The process strips away everything that isn't essential to your highest development, including relationships and experiences that ordinary people consider fundamental to a good life. Sexual relationships are often the first casualty of serious spiritual growth, not because sex is unspiritual, but because the level of consciousness required for real spiritual development makes ordinary intimate relationships extremely difficult to maintain. Your awareness becomes so refined, so sensitive to subtle energies and deeper truths, that most people feel energetically incompatible with you. This isn't a temporary phase you pass through on your way to some perfect spiritual relationship. It's a permanent restructuring of your entire being that makes ordinary human bonding nearly impossible. You evolve beyond the frequency at which most intimate relationships operate, and there's usually no going back to simpler ways of connecting. The price becomes steeper as your evolution accelerates. Friends who once felt close begin to seem shallow. Activities that once brought pleasure start to feel empty. Your sexual energy gets redirected into spiritual development, whether you want it to or not. Instead of flowing outward into intimate relationship, it flows upward through your system, feeding expanded consciousness and spiritual insights. The transformation affects your body as well as your consciousness. You become more sensitive to foods, environments, and energies in ways that make ordinary social interactions challenging. Physical intimacy becomes particularly complex because your body processes sexual energy differently as you evolve spiritually. What used to feel like simple physical pleasure now carries overwhelming layers of energetic and emotional information. The isolation that comes with spiritual evolution isn't just social, it's existential. You start to feel like you're living in a different reality than most people. Your concerns, interests, and ways of finding meaning become so different from ordinary human experience that genuine communication becomes increasingly difficult. This creates a cruel irony. The more you grow spiritually, the more love and compassion you develop for all beings. But the very expansion of your heart that makes you love more deeply also makes personal, intimate relationships nearly impossible. You love everyone more, but you can be truly close to almost no one. You might go through periods of rebellion against the evolutionary process, trying to force yourself back into ordinary human patterns. But these attempts usually fail because you can't unknow what you've learned. The consciousness changes are irreversible, and fighting against them usually just creates additional suffering. Understanding spiritual evolution as a brutal process rather than a beautiful journey helps you stop fighting against the losses it demands. You begin to see the isolation and sexual deprivation not as personal failures, but as natural consequences of consciousness development. Your life becomes a sacrifice offered to human consciousness evolution, whether you originally volunteered for this role or not. The brutal price ultimately transforms you into something that serves purposes beyond personal happiness. Your consciousness becomes a gift to collective human development, but these contributions come at the cost of simple human pleasures that others take for granted.